Have you ever felt invisible, like the world looks right through you, judging you by a uniform, never seeing the person inside? This is a story about a moment that shatters that invisibility. It begins in the hushed, gilded cage of one of New York's most exclusive restaurants, where a titan of industry, a man who could buy and sell entire city blocks, decides to unload his frustrations on a quiet waitress. He chose to do it in a language he believed was his secret weapon, a tongue he thought no one in the room could possibly understand. He was wrong. What she said back to him in that same language didn't just silence the room, it triggered a chain reaction that would unravel a multi-billion-dollar conspiracy and change both of their lives forever. Stay tuned to find out what happens when the most underestimated person in the room becomes the most powerful. Aria was not a restaurant. It was a statement. Perched 60 floors above the glittering chaos of Manhattan, its floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city like a living masterpiece. The air inside hummed with the low thrum of power, the murmur of politicians, the soft laughter of old money, the sharp, decisive tones of Wall Street predators. Every clink of crystal silverware against bone china was a punctuation mark in a sentence worth millions. Into this world, Ale Vance moved like a ghost. At 26, she wore her waitress uniform like a cloak of invisibility. Her movements were economical and precise, a ballet of silent service learned over 2 long years of practice. She could balance a tray laden with lobster thermidor and crystal flutes of Dom Perignon, while navigating the treacherous terrain between tables with the grace of a whisper. Her face was pleasantly neutral, her smile a small professional curve that never quite reached her eyes. To the patrons of Aria, she was a pair of hands, a polite voice, a function, and that was exactly how she wanted it. Anonymity was a sanctuary. Before Aria Ale's life had been anything but anonymous. She had been a prodigy, a name whispered with awe in the hushed halls of linguistics departments, and later in the steel and glass towers of international diplomacy. Graduating summa cum laude from Columbia at 19 with a double major in East Asian Studies and International Relations, she was fluent in 5 languages. Japanese, however, was her art. She didn't just speak it. She understood its soul, the intricate dance of honorifics, the weight of unspoken words, the culture breathing beneath the grammar. She had been the youngest senior translator for the State Department, a rising star, until a catastrophic misinterpretation, not her own, but one she was blamed for, had derailed a sensitive trade negotiation with Tokyo. Her mentor, a man she'd trusted implicitly, had thrown her under the bus to save his own career. The fallout was brutal. Blacklisted, betrayed, and burdened with the sudden crushing weight of her younger sister Chloe's medical bills, Ale had retreated. She'd shed her old life like a skin, taking a cash-in-hand job where no one would look twice at her resume. Aria, the pinnacle of fine dining, was, ironically, the perfect place to hide in plain sight. Tonight, the hum of power at Aria was louder than usual. The corner table, the one with the most commanding view of the skyline, was occupied by Joshua Thorne. Thorne wasn't just a CEO, he was a dynasty. Thorne Industries, a global tech conglomerate, was his birthright, a kingdom he had expanded with a ruthlessness that was legendary. He was in his late 30s with sharp, tailored suits that seemed molded to his athletic frame, and eyes the color of a winter storm. He didn't speak. He issued decrees. He didn't request. He commanded. His presence sucked the oxygen from the air around him. He was dining with 2 Japanese gentlemen, older men with impassive faces and impeccable manners. Mr. Tanaka and Mr. Sato of Yamato Corporation. The city's financial papers had been buzzing for weeks about a potential merger, a deal worth billions that would make Thorn Industries the undisputed global leader in micro-robotics. From the tension etched on Joshua Thorn's jaw, Ale could tell the negotiations were not going smoothly. Water. Still. No ice. Thorn had snapped at her earlier without making eye contact. Another bottle of the A-Tier 2 Petrus he'd ordered, waving a dismissive hand. Ale had complied with her customary quiet efficiency. She understood men like him. They saw the world as a series of obstacles to be conquered, or pawns to be moved. She was to him less than a pawn. She was part of the furniture. As she cleared their appetizer plates, she caught snippets of the conversation. Thorn's English was loud and forceful, a battering ram of corporate jargon. The Japanese men responded in quiet, carefully modulated tones, their own English flawless but reserved. There was a disconnect, a chasm of cultural misunderstanding that Ale could feel in her bones. Thorn was pushing, selling, dominating. They were listening, nodding, and revealing nothing. He was playing chess like it was a game of checkers, and he was losing without even knowing it. The main course arrived. A junior waiter, a nervous young man named Leo, on his first week, was assisting Ale. His hands trembled slightly as he placed a plate of seared A5 Wagyu in front of Mr. Tanaka. In his nervousness, his sleeve brushed against a water glass. It tipped. The spill was minor, a small pool of water, spreading silently on the pristine white linen, stopping inches from Mr. Tanaka's sleeve. But to Joshua Thorn it was not a mistake. It was a flaw in his universe, a crack in the perfect facade of power he was trying to project. His eyes, cold and furious, snapped up from his plate. They didn't land on Leo the culprit. They landed on Ale, the senior server, the one in charge. The storm broke. The silence that fell over table 12 was instantaneous and absolute. Mr. Tanaka and Mr. Sato froze, their chopsticks hovering mid-air. Leo, the junior waiter, looked as if he might faint, his face bleached of all color. The low hum of the restaurant seemed to fade into a distant buzz, the entire universe shrinking to this single supercharged point in space. Joshua Thorn didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The fury radiating from him was a physical force, a drop in temperature that made the air feel brittle. He placed his fork and knife down on his plate with a quiet, deliberate click that sounded like a gunshot. He looked directly at Ale, but it was a look of profound dismissal, as if she were a piece of malfunctioning equipment. His lips curled into a sneer. He leaned forward slightly, turning his head just enough so that his guests couldn't read his lips, but his voice, low and guttural, carried directly to her. And then he began to speak in Japanese. He assumed with the supreme arrogance of the powerful that his words were a private channel, a secret language in a room full of ignorant Americans. He thought he was venting into a void. He was not. To Ale, every word landed like a physical blow. Her training, her very soul was steeped in this language. She didn't just hear the words, she saw their shape, felt their texture, understood the precise, calculated cruelty of their arrangement. He started with the basics, his accent surprisingly fluent, if aggressive. "Clean up this glass immediately, you idiot," he growled. But he didn't stop there. The spilled water was just the catalyst, the spark that ignited a bonfire of frustration that had clearly been smoldering for days. His gaze remained locked on her, but his tirade expanded, becoming a torrent of venom about the deal, his guests, his entire situation. Why do they hire such incompetent people? Everything must be perfect. He gestured with a flick of his eyes towards his Japanese guests, his voice dropping to an even more conspiratorial, contemptuous whisper. Mr. Tanaka is like a stone. Just sits there, no expression. They have no idea what I've sacrificed to get this deal done. Ale's heart began to pound against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. This was no longer just an insult to a waitress. This was a catastrophic breach of protocol. He was openly disparaging his guest, the very man he was trying to court, using a language he believed was a shield. She could see Leo trembling, wanting to apologize, to do something, but frozen by the sheer intensity of the CEO's rage. Thorne wasn't finished. The poison ran deeper. He started talking about the specifics of the negotiation, the sticking points, his strategy. It was a breathtaking display of arrogance and folly. They talk about respect and trust, but it's all about the money. The old guard at Yamato is afraid of new technology. What I am offering is a revolution. They are trying to gut it. He called Mr. Sato a cunning old fox and complained about the endless, meaningless rituals of Japanese business etiquette. He was laying his entire strategy, his frustrations, and his contempt bare for her, the invisible waitress, to hear. Ale stood rooted to the spot, the tray in her hand, feeling impossibly heavy. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, to simply melt away as she was trained to do. But something else, a long dormant part of her, began to stir. It was the scholar who had dedicated her life to the beauty of this language. It was the diplomat who knew the catastrophic weight of these words. And it was the woman who had been a scapegoat once before, broken and discarded by a powerful man's arrogance. A cold, clear resolve washed over her, extinguishing the fear. She would not be a ghost tonight. She watched as he finished his tirade, his chest heaving slightly. He ended with a final dismissive flick of his hand. Now go. Clean up this mess and get out of my sight. He leaned back in his chair, the picture of condescending authority, expecting her to scurry away like a frightened mouse. He had no idea what was coming. For a heartbeat, there was only the sound of Joshua Thorne's breathing. He stared at Ale, his eyes daring her to so much as flinch. He expected fear, maybe tears. He expected a stammered, pathetic apology in English. He did not expect the quiet dignity with which she straightened her spine. He did not expect the way she set her heavy tray down on a nearby service stand with a steady, silent grace. He did not expect her to turn back to him, meet his stormy gaze without a trace of subservience, and bow. It wasn't a waitress's hurried nod. It was a formal, precise bow, shoulders straight back, inclined exactly 15 degrees, the kind of bow reserved for a respected equal. And then she spoke. Her voice, when it came, was not loud. It was low, perfectly modulated, and flowed with the flawless, articulate cadence of a native speaker from Tokyo. It was a class of Japanese, far more refined and elegant than the brutish, functional dialect he had just used. I am deeply sorry, she began, using the formal honorific for his name. Joshua Thorne's face went rigid. It was not a flicker of surprise. It was a full-body shock, as if he'd been struck by lightning. His mouth fell slightly open. Ale continued her voice, never wavering, her eyes holding his. She addressed his outburst, point by point, her words a silken blade. I sincerely apologize for interrupting your meal with such a clumsy error. But please rest assured, this incompetent person will clean up this mess immediately. She used his exact insults, incompetent person, mess, and wrapped them in the elegant, devastatingly polite grammar of Keigo, the formal Japanese language. It was a verbal parry of masterful skill, acknowledging his words while simultaneously holding them up for inspection. The blood drained from Thorne's face. Beside him, Mr. Tanaka and Mr. Sato, who had pretended not to understand his angry tirade, now looked up with sharp, sudden interest. Their impassive masks had cracked. They understood her perfectly. Ale wasn't finished. She took a small step closer, her voice dropping to a confidential yet crystal-clear tone that only the three men could hear. I am aware that your transaction with the Yamato Corporation is of great importance." Then she looked past him, giving a subtle respectful nod to his guests. "It is a shame upon Aria that we could not provide the highest level of hospitality to such respected guests as Mr. Tanaka and Mr. Sato." With that single sentence, she did 3 things. She exposed Thorne's disrespect. She elevated his guests, showing them the deference he had failed to. And she aligned herself with the honor of the restaurant, positioning herself as a guardian of its standards, not a mere servant. Finally, she delivered the killing blow. Her eyes met Thorne's again, and there was a flicker of something in them, not malice, but a profound, unshakable confidence. And Mr. Thorne, perhaps respect and trust are things that cannot be bought with money. Sometimes they hold more power than a revolution. She held his gaze for 1 more second, letting her words sink into the petrified silence. She had quoted his own cynical rant back at him, turning his secret contempt into a public lesson on honor. Then, with the same unhurried grace, she bowed once more to the table. She turned to the terrified Leo, gave him a small, reassuring nod, and began efficiently clearing the spilled water with a fresh napkin. The spell was broken. The restaurant erupted in a cacophony of whispers. Everyone from the kitchen staff peering through the service window to the socialites at the bar knew that something extraordinary had just happened. Joshua Thorne sat frozen in his chair, his face a mask of pale, incandescent fury and utter humiliation. He, the master of the universe, had been publicly checked, not by a rival CEO, not by a Wall Street shark, but by a waitress. He pushed his chair back violently, the legs scraping loudly against the marble floor. He stood up, his fists clenched at his sides. "You're fired," he spat out the words thick with venom. He was speaking English now, his voice shaking with rage. Alay didn't even look at him. She simply placed the soiled napkin on her tray. "That won't be necessary," she said, her voice calm and clear, the English a stark contrast to the Japanese she had just spoken. "I quit." She picked up her tray, turned her back on the most powerful man in the room, and walked away, her head held high. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She could feel the weight of every eye in the room on her, but for the first time in 2 years, it wasn't the gaze of dismissal. It was the gaze of awe. The walk from table 12 to the staff locker room was the longest of Alay's life. The adrenaline coursed through her veins, a roaring fire that left her hands trembling and her mind unnaturally sharp. She ignored the shocked faces of her colleagues, the frantic gestures of her manager Charles, who looked like he was having a heart attack. She stripped off her uniform, the black vest, the crisp white shirt, the apron that had served as her armor, and her cage, and changed into her simple jeans and sweater. The fabric felt foreign, real. It felt like her own skin. Stepping out of Aria's gilded entrance and into the cool October night, the blare of New York City traffic was a welcome shock to her system. It was loud, chaotic, and blessedly indifferent. She was anonymous again. But this time it was by her own choice. The relief was so profound it almost brought her to her knees. But beneath it was a tremor of fear. She was jobless. Chloe's next round of experimental treatment was in 3 weeks, and it cost more than she made in 6 months. The thought was a splash of icy water. What had she done? Meanwhile, back on the 60th floor, the atmosphere at Joshua Thorne's table was arctic. Alay's departure had left a vacuum that was filled with an excruciating silence. Mr. Tanaka and Mr. Sato were looking at him, their faces polite, but their eyes as sharp and analytical as a surgeon's scalpel. They had seen the real Joshua Thorne, arrogant, disrespectful, and careless. The mask had not just slipped, it had been ripped away. The meal concluded with brisk, excruciatingly formal pleasantries. The multi-billion-dollar handshake he'd been hoping for was replaced by a cool, distant bow. As they left, Mr. Tanaka paused, turned to Joshua, and said in perfect English, "The view from your restaurant is remarkable, Mr. Thorne. It shows you everything if you know where to look." The meaning was clear. Joshua had been looking at the skyline, but he had missed what was right in front of him. Joshua Thorne didn't sleep that night. He paced the length of his penthouse apartment, the city lights mockingly twinkling below. It wasn't just the deal, which he could now feel, slipping through his fingers like sand. It was her, the waitress. Perhaps respect and trust are things that cannot be bought with money. Her words echoed in his mind, a perfect tormenting loop. She hadn't just understood his Japanese. She had understood his entire predicament. She'd diagnosed the core failure of his negotiation strategy in a single devastating sentence. Who was she? The next morning he made a call, not to his lawyers or his board of directors, but to a man named David Smith, a former intelligence operative who now ran the most discreet and efficient private security firm in the city. "I need you to find someone." Joshua said, his voice raw. "A waitress? Her name is Ole. She worked at Aria. I want to know everything. Where she went to school, who her family is, what she had for breakfast this morning. Everything." As Smith's team began their work, Joshua's professional life started to unravel. An email arrived from Yamato Corporation. They were postponing the next round of merger talks to reevaluate the foundational principles of the proposed partnership. It was a corporate death sentence, written in the polite language of Japanese business. Panic began to set in. This wasn't just another deal for Joshua. It was his legacy. His father, the formidable founder of Thorne Industries, had always viewed him as a ruthless brute who lacked finesse. Joshua was determined to prove him wrong by landing the Yamato deal, a company his father had failed to acquire for a decade. Now that dream was turning to ash. 2 days later, Smith's report landed on his desk. It was a slim file, but its contents were explosive. Joshua read it, then read it again, a knot of disbelief tightening in his stomach. Ale Vance, Columbia University, B.A. International Relations and East Asian Studies, summa cum laude. Former Senior Linguistic Specialist, U.S. Department of State. Lead Translator for the 2023 U.S.-Japan Semiconductor Accord. Resigned following the accord's near collapse, citing personal reasons. Official inquiry cited a critical mistranslation of the term regulation instead of the more nuanced guideline, nearly scuttling the deal. Vance was unofficially implicated. Current status unemployed. Sole guardian of her sister, Chloe Vance, age 19, currently undergoing treatment for a rare autoimmune disorder at Mount Sinai. Medical expenses substantial. The report included a name, Marcus Thorne. Joshua froze. Marcus Thorne was his cousin, a slick, ambitious executive in his International Development Division. A man Joshua had always distrusted, but had been forced to keep on due to family pressure. A man who had been the secondary advisor on the Yamato deal. And the report noted with brutal efficiency the man who had been Ale Vance's direct superior and fiancé at the State Department. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Marcus had been there. He knew about the Kisei incident. He knew Ale had argued vehemently for the correct translation, but that he, as the senior diplomat, had overruled her. And then, when it blew up, had allowed her to take the fall to save himself. Joshua felt a wave of nausea. His cousin, an employee inside his own company, had not only destroyed this brilliant woman's career, but was now advising him on the Yamato deal. Was he giving him bad advice? Was he intentionally feeding his worst instincts, encouraging his aggressive, Western-centric approach, knowing it would fail with the Japanese? Was Marcus, sabotaging the deal from the inside. Suddenly Joshua Thorne, the titan of industry, felt like a fool. He had been playing the game on a board he didn't understand, and the one person who could read it for him was the woman he had tried to crush under his heel. He looked at the last line of the report. Ale Vance's current address, a small walk-up apartment in Queens. He had her fired. He had humiliated her. Now he realized with a dawning, terrifying clarity he didn't just want her help. He needed it. The address in Queens led Joshua to a world away from his own. The brownstone building was old, its facade weathered by a century of city life. There were no doormen, no polished marble lobbies. Just a steep set of stairs and the faint smell of garlic and old paper. He felt conspicuously out of place in his $1,000 suit, a shark in a goldfish pond. He found apartment 4B and hesitated, his hand hovering over the simple wooden door. What was he going to say? "Sorry I called you an incompetent idiot and tried to ruin your life, but now I need you to save my multi-billion-dollar deal." He had negotiated hostile takeovers and faced down federal regulators, but he had never felt so utterly out of his depth. Taking a breath, he knocked. The door opened a few moments later. It was Ole. She wasn't wearing a uniform. In jeans and a simple grey t-shirt with her dark hair tied back loosely, she looked younger, softer, but her eyes were just as intelligent, and right now they were filled with a cold, wary fire. "Mr. Thorne," she said. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. It was somehow more intimidating than if she had yelled. "Miss Vance," he began, his own voice sounding hollow. "May I come in?" She didn't answer immediately. She just looked at him, her gaze unwavering, forcing him to stand there on her welcome mat, a supplicant. Finally, she stepped aside. "I have 5 minutes." Her apartment was small but immaculate. Bookshelves overflowed with volumes in multiple languages. On a small desk, a laptop was open to a complex-looking medical research paper. A framed photo on the wall showed Ale with a smiling, vibrant young woman who looked just like her sister Chloe. The reality of her life, the one he had so carelessly threatened, was all around him. "I came here to apologize," he said, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. "What I did at the restaurant was inexcusable. My behavior was unacceptable." Ale crossed her arms. "Is that all?" "No." He took a step further into the room. "I also came to understand. I had my security team look into you," a flash of anger in her eyes. "You had me investigated. I had to," he said, pressing on. "I read about what happened at the State Department, about the semiconductor accord, about Marcus." Hearing her ex-fiancé's name was like a crack in her composure. A flicker of old pain crossed her face before she masked it again. "My cousin Marcus Thorne is on my advisory team for the Yamato deal," Joshua said, watching her face carefully. "He's been guiding my strategy." The pieces fell into place for Ale. The aggressive tactics, the cultural tone deafness, the disastrous results, it all had Marcus's fingerprints on it. He wasn't just incompetent. He was actively sabotaging the deal, likely to make Joshua fail and open a path for his own advancement within the company. And he was using the same playbook he'd used to destroy her. "So you're being played," she said, her voice sharp with a bitter irony. "And now you've come to the woman you fired to clean up your mess. The other mess." The truth of her words stung. Yes, he admitted. There was no point in lying. The deal is dead. Yamato has postponed talks indefinitely. They think I'm an arrogant American brute who holds them in contempt. "And are they wrong?" she shot back. He flinched. "At the restaurant?" "Yes, they were right. I was under incredible pressure, and I behaved like a tyrant. but my respect for what Yamato has built is genuine. My vision for our combined future is real. Marcus has been filtering my approach, amplifying my worst instincts. He paused, gathering himself. This was the moment of truth. I need your help, Ms. Vance. I need you to help me understand what I've been missing. I need a translator, a consultant, a cultural attaché. I'll pay you whatever you want. Name your price. He gestured around the small apartment. I know about your sister's medical bills. I can take care of all of it. A blank check. He thought the offer of money of solving her biggest problem would be the key. He was wrong. Ale laughed, a short, humorless sound. A blank check. Is that how you solve everything, Mr. Thorne? You break something, then you try to buy a new one. You think you can buy my knowledge, my experience. You think you can buy my trust after what you did, after what your family already did to me. She walked to her desk and picked up the medical paper. This is a clinical trial report for a new immunosuppressant. Chloe might be eligible. It's a long shot. It's also incredibly expensive to even get on the list. For 2 years I have worked double shifts, lived on nothing, and swallowed my pride serving men like you all for a chance, a tiny chance to save her. She looked at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears of anger and frustration. My life is not a business problem you can solve with a wire transfer. The expertise you want came at the cost of my career, my reputation, my heart. It is not for sale. Joshua stood there, stripped of his power. His money, his influence, they were useless here. He had come to hire an asset and had found a person he had deeply wronged. He realized that an apology wasn't enough. A job offer wasn't enough. He had to offer the one thing he never gave away: vulnerability. You're right, he said, his voice quiet. You are right, I can't buy it. So I'm asking. He met her gaze, letting her see the desperation, and for the first time, the genuine fear of failure in his eyes. My father built Thorne Industries from nothing. He never thought I was good enough to lead it. He thought I was just a blunt instrument. This Yamato deal, this was my chance to prove him wrong, to create something, not just conquer something. Marcus knows that. He knows this failure would break me, not just professionally, but personally. He took a deep breath. Forget the money. Forget the job title. I am asking you, Ale, to help me. Not for me, but to stop my cousin from succeeding. He broke your career. Now he's trying to break mine. Don't let him win. Help me save this deal, and you won't just be a consultant. You'll be a partner. 20% of my personal bonus from the merger's completion. Full medical coverage for your sister for life through the company's executive plan. And a formal public exoneration for what happened at the State Department. I'll use every resource I have to clear your name and expose Marcus for what he did. He had finally offered her something more valuable than money. He had offered her justice. Ale stared at him, the conflict warring in her eyes. The idea of returning to that world of facing Marcus was terrifying. But the thought of her sister getting the best care imaginable of her own name, being cleared of seeing Marcus finally face the consequences of his actions, it was a powerful lure. This wasn't about serving Joshua Thorne. It was about reclaiming her own life. She took a slow, deliberate breath. Fine, she said. But we do this my way. You don't speak in meetings unless I tell you to. You don't make a move without my approval. I am not your employee, Mr. Thorne. I am in charge. Are we clear? A slow smile spread across Joshua's face, the first genuine one she had ever seen. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated relief. Crystal clear, Ms. Vance. The transformation was immediate and jarring. The next morning, a black car whisked Ole from her queen's walk-up to the gleaming monolithic tower of Thorn Industries. She walked through the lobby not as a ghost, but as a spectre, an unknown entity at Joshua Thorn's side, causing whispers to ripple in her wake. Joshua was true to his word. He introduced her in an emergency board meeting, not as a consultant, but as his senior strategic advisor on the Yamato partnership. He didn't explain her background, letting the mystery of her sudden appearance amplify her authority. Marcus Thorn was in that meeting. When he saw Ale walk in beside his cousin, his handsome, curated smile froze on his face. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving behind a pasty, sickly pallor. He looked at her as if he had seen a ghost, the ghost of the career he had buried. Ale, he stammered, trying to recover. What a surprise. I had no idea you were. I'm in charge. Now, Marcus Ale, said, her voice cool and even. She didn't offer a handshake. She didn't acknowledge their past. She simply looked through him, the way Joshua had once looked through her. The power dynamic had been inverted, with breathtaking speed. Her first act was to demand every piece of communication related to the Yamato deal, emails, memos, meeting transcripts, even Joshua's handwritten notes. For 2 days, she sequestered herself in a corner office with a panoramic view she barely noticed. She didn't just read the words, she analyzed the spaces between them. What she found was a masterclass in subtle sabotage. Marcus had consistently misinterpreted Japanese ambiguity as weakness, framing their polite requests for more time as stalling tactics. He had translated Mr. Tanaka's formal philosophical emails into blunt, transactional English, stripping them of all nuance and respect. He had advised Joshua to push harder, to issue ultimatums to show them whose boss a strategy guaranteed to fail. He was creating a feedback loop of cultural misunderstanding, making Joshua appear more and more like the arrogant American brute he wanted Yamato to see. He's been poisoning the well from the start, Ale told Joshua, pointing to a specific email chain. Look here, Tanaka-san writes about the need to build a bridge of mutual prosperity. Marcus summarizes this for you, as they're concerned about profit sharing. He's taking a concept of honor and partnership and reducing it to raw greed. He's been making you speak a different language even when you're both speaking English. Under Ole's direction, the entire strategy shifted. The first move was silence. No more aggressive follow-ups. No more demands for meetings. Instead, Ale drafted a single short letter. It was written in exquisite formal Japanese and signed by Joshua. It did not mention the deal. It did not mention business at all. It was a formal apology for the inhospitable and disruptive atmosphere during their dinner at Aria. It went on to say that Joshua had been reflecting on Mr. Tanaka's wisdom about knowing where to look and had come to realize he had been looking at the wrong things. It ended with a simple wish for their continued health and success, with no expectation of a reply. This is it, Joshua asked, looking at the translated draft. We're just apologizing and walking away. We are showing humility, Ale corrected him. We are acknowledging our fault without groveling. We are giving them the one thing Marcus never would respect. Now we wait. The wait was agonizing for Joshua, a man used to constant action. For 3 days there was nothing. Marcus grew smug, telling other board members that Joshua's new advisor had sunk the deal for good. Joshua, to his credit, held his nerve. He deferred every question to Ale, showing a united front that infuriated his cousin. Then on the 4th day, an email arrived. It was from Mr. Tanaka himself. It was also in Japanese. Joshua handed his tablet to Ale, his hands sweating. She read it, a slow, thoughtful expression on her face. He quotes an old Japanese proverb, she said softly. After the rain, the ground hardens. He says our letter was unexpected and demonstrated a depth of character he had previously not seen. He has invited us to Tokyo, not to negotiate, but to visit the Yamato Corporation's founding shrine and to have tea. Joshua's heart leapt. Is that good? It's not good, Ale said, a small, genuine smile finally gracing her lips. It's everything. He's giving us a chance to reset, to start over. On his terms. On his soil. There was one condition. Tanaka had specifically requested that Joshua bring his new thoughtful advisor with him. He had also specifically requested that Marcus Thorne not be part of the delegation. The battle was not over, but the war had just shifted to a new front. And this time, Joshua Thorne had the right general leading the charge. The flight to Tokyo was a 14-hour marathon of strategy and education. Ale didn't just brief Joshua, she drilled him. She taught him the subtle art of the Japanese bow, when to use it, how deep to incline, how long to hold it. She coached him on receiving a business card with 2 hands, on the importance of seating arrangements, on the symbolic meaning of gift-giving. She was recalibrating him, transforming him from a Western battering ram into a man who could understand and wield the power of subtlety. Their arrival was quiet. No fanfare, no corporate welcoming committee, just a single car sent to take them to their hotel. It was a test. The next day they met Mr. Tanaka and Mr. Sato at the promised shrine. It was a serene, ancient place, worlds away from a corporate boardroom. They walked through manicured gardens, speaking of history, of philosophy, of the changing of the seasons. The merger was never mentioned. Ale spoke little, but her presence was a quiet testament to the change in Joshua. She was the physical proof of his newfound humility. The tea ceremony that followed was the real negotiation. Every movement was precise, every silence heavy with meaning. Ale had warned Joshua that the most important conversations would happen without words. He watched, he listened, and for the first time in his life, he followed someone else's lead completely. He mirrored Mr. Tanaka's pace, showing patience and respect. It was during this ceremony that Mr. Tanaka finally addressed the elephant in the room, albeit indirectly. In Japan, he said, looking at a centuries-old bonsai tree, we believe that what is strong is not always what is rigid. The bamboo that bends in the wind survives the storm. The oak that resists breaks. I had believed Thorne Industries was an oak. He paused, then looked at Joshua. Perhaps I was mistaken. This was the opening. Following Ale's careful script, Joshua responded. I was taught to be an oak, he said honestly. But I am learning the wisdom of the bamboo. Sometimes a strong root system needs to learn how to bend to find the sun. It was the perfect response. It was humble, metaphorical, and showed an understanding of their values. Mr. Tanaka nodded, a flicker of genuine approval in his eyes. The deal was not signed, but the ground once hardened by the storm of misunderstanding was now fertile. They returned to New York with a new framework for discussion. The momentum had shifted entirely, but they both knew Marcus would not give up so easily. He was cornered, and a cornered snake is at its most dangerous. The final meeting was set to take place at Thorne Industries headquarters. The Yamato delegation flew in, and the air in the boardroom was thick with anticipation. Marcus, to everyone's surprise, was there. He claimed he had vital, last-minute market analysis to present. Joshua, on Ale's advice, allowed it. It was better to face the devil, you know. The meeting began well. Joshua, with Ale by his side, presented a revised merger proposal. It was completely different from his first attempt. It focused on partnership, on preserving the Yamato legacy, on a 100-year plan for mutual growth, all concepts Ale had woven into the corporate structure. Mr. Tanaka and his team were visibly impressed. Then it was Marcus's turn. He stood up, his face a mask of false sincerity. "Gentlemen," he began, "while I am inspired by this new spirit of cooperation, my fiduciary duty requires me to share some troubling new data." He launched a presentation filled with charts and graphs detailing a supposed sudden downturn in the specific micro-robotics sector Yamato specialized in. He painted a picture of a company whose core technology was about to become obsolete, making Thorne's generous offer not just fair, but a bailout. He was trying to poison the well one last time, to reframe the deal as a conquest and undermine the trust they had so carefully built. It was a desperate, ugly move. Mr. Tanaka's face hardened. The atmosphere turned frigid once more. Before Joshua could explode, Ale placed a calming hand on his arm. Then she stood up. "Marcus-san," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. She addressed him in Japanese, forcing the entire conversation onto her home turf. "Your analysis is very thorough, but you seem to have overlooked the data from the AIST and the NEDO reports from last month. She didn't have a presentation. She didn't need one." She began citing from memory the specific findings from two of Japan's most prestigious technology institutes' reports that directly contradicted Marcus's data and forecasted massive growth. She outlined the new government subsidies and pointed out a critical patent application by a rival that Marcus had conveniently omitted, a patent Yamato was poised to acquire, which would render his entire analysis moot. She dismantled his entire argument in less than 5 minutes, her Japanese fluent and precise. She wasn't just presenting data, she was demonstrating a level of expertise and deep insider knowledge that he, for all his bluster, could never match. She finished, then turned to Mr. Tanaka. "My deepest apologies for the interruption. It seems some of us are still reading from an old playbook." The implication was clear. Marcus was not just wrong, he was dishonest. He had been caught in a blatant attempt to mislead not just his own CEO, but their honored guests. He stood there speechless, his face crimson. He was finished. Mr. Tanaka looked at Marcus with utter disdain. Then he looked at Joshua, and finally at Ale. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. He stood up and extended his hand to Joshua, a Western gesture of final, unequivocal agreement. "Thorne-san," he said in English, "it seems you have finally found the right advisor. Let us build our bridge." The room erupted in applause. Joshua shook Tanaka's hand, a feeling of profound victory washing over him. But he knew it wasn't his victory alone. He looked over at Ale, who was watching with a quiet, satisfied smile. In the aftermath, Marcus Thorne was fired and quietly disgraced. Joshua, as promised, launched a full internal investigation that led to a public statement clearing Ale's name in the State Department scandal. The story of the rogue advisor who sabotaged the accord became a cautionary tale in diplomatic circles. Months later, the Thorne-Yamato merger was complete, hailed as a landmark of international cooperation. Chloe Vance, now covered by the best medical insurance money could buy, was accepted into the clinical trial and was showing signs of remission. Ale never went back to being a ghost. She didn't accept a permanent position at Thorne Industries. Instead, she opened Vance Strategic Consulting, a high-level firm specializing in cross-cultural business relations. Her first client, on a multi-million-dollar retainer, was Joshua Thorne. One evening, Joshua visited her new office, a sleek, minimalist space with a commanding view of the city. He didn't come as a CEO, but as a friend. "I still can't believe it all started with a glass of spilled water," he said, looking out the window. Ale smiled. "It didn't start there," she said. It started when you decided to yell at a waitress in a language you thought she couldn't understand. You thought it was your secret weapon. And it turned out to be yours? He finished, a look of genuine admiration on his face. You heard what I was saying, but you understood what I was missing. That's the thing about language, Joshua, she replied, her eyes reflecting the city lights. It's not just about what you say. It's about who you're willing to listen to. 6 months after the Thorn-Yamato merger, the city was draped in the crisp golden hues of late spring. The air, once a harbinger of a cold and uncertain future for Alay, now felt full of promise. She was no longer watching the seasons change from behind the plate glass window of a restaurant, but from the passenger seat of a town car heading towards the annual Mount Sinai Medical Research Foundation gala. Beside her, Chloe was adjusting the sleeve of an elegant midnight blue dress. The color brought out the light in her eyes, a light that had been dim for far too long. The clinical trial had been a staggering success. While her recovery was an ongoing journey, the relentless fatigue and pain had receded, replaced by a vibrant energy that Alay hadn't seen in years. I still can't believe he bought a whole table, Chloe said, her voice a mix of awe and amusement, and put us at the head of it. He's not just a donor, Chloe, Alay said, a soft smile on her face. He's the co-chair of the fundraising committee now. He says he's diversifying his portfolio, investing in things that have a better return than money. They arrived at the grand ballroom, a glittering space filled with the city's philanthropic elite. Here, among the surgeons, scientists, and patrons of medicine, Joshua Thorn looked different. He was still impeccably dressed, still radiated an innate authority, but the harsh, impatient edge was gone. He moved through the crowd with a relaxed confidence, his smile genuine, his eyes engaging with the people he spoke to, truly seeing them. When he saw the Vance sisters arrive, he excused himself from a conversation with the hospital director and walked over, his expression warm and welcoming. Alay, Chloe, I'm so glad you could make it. He addressed Chloe directly, his voice gentle. You look wonderful. Truly. Thank you, Mr. Thorn, for everything, Chloe said, her sincerity shining. This night, this research, it means the world to us. Call me Joshua, he insisted, and the thanks belong to your sister. She taught me that the most valuable assets aren't on any balance sheet. He looked at Alay, and in that gaze was a universe of shared history, the fury of that night at Aria, the tension of their first meeting in her apartment, the triumph in that Tokyo boardroom. It was a look of profound, unwavering respect. Later in the evening, as a renowned oncologist spoke on stage about the breakthroughs funded by the foundation, the three of them stood by the terrace overlooking the city. You know, Joshua said quietly, watching the speaker. For years I saw these events as transactions. You write a check, you get your name on a plaque, you improve your public image. I never stopped to think about the people in the rooms the research was for. The actual lives. Most people don't, Alay said. It's easy to live 60 floors above the world and forget what the ground looks like. He nodded, accepting the mild rebuke for what it was, a reminder of how far he'd come. My new project, he said, changing the subject. We're expanding into biotech labs in Kyoto. The partnership council there is notoriously difficult. Old world, very traditional. Let me guess, Chloe chimed in with a playful glint in her eye. They value respect and trust. Joshua laughed, a real unforced sound that turned heads. Among other things, I told them I wouldn't even consider the expansion unless I had my senior strategic advisor leading the cultural integration. He looked at Alay. They've already read about your work on the Yamato deal. They're hoping you'll agree to be the keynote speaker at the initial summit." Ale looked from Joshua's expectant face to her sister's beaming one. A year ago, she had been pouring water for men like him. Her voice silenced her past, buried. Now she was being asked to stand on a world stage, not as a translator, but as an authority. As herself. "I'll have my office send over my terms." She said the professional words softened by a grateful smile. The circle was complete. The voice that Joshua Thorne had once tried to silence in a torrent of angry Japanese was now the very voice he and others like him sought out for its wisdom and strength. It was a voice she had reclaimed, a voice she would use not just to build bridges between corporations, but to remind the powerful of the silent, unseen people whose lives form the foundations of their empires. And so a story that began with an act of arrogance ended with a lesson in humility, respect, and the incredible power that lies hidden within the quietest people in the room. Ale Vance went from being an invisible waitress to an indispensable leader, not by changing who she was, but by finally being seen for who she had been all along. Joshua Thorne, a titan who thought he could command the world, learned that true strength comes from the willingness to listen and learn. Their story reminds us that everyone we meet is fighting a battle we know nothing about, and that beneath a uniform or a simple job title, there can be a universe of experience, talent, and wisdom awaiting for its moment. If this story of hidden strength and unexpected redemption resonated with you, please hit that like button to let us know. Share it with someone who might need a reminder of their own hidden power. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that inspire and surprise. What did you think of Ale's comeback? Let us know in the comments below.